Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Thursday, June 13th, 2013, almost to the middle of the month here. And I got to tell you, around here, it's already feeling like autumn. It's warm during the day. It's tourist weather, but it does get very cold at night, and which is great because then the lady love will snuggle up to me all that much harder. Anyway, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room, managing the equipment and keeping us out of trouble and ready to answer the phone when you call on in with your concerns here. Obviously, the massive spy operation by the United States government against, well, everybody, continues to be a major, major scandal. We're going to talk about it a little bit more today. We may pull back from it in the next day or two because there's a lot of other scandals we need to start putting a little bit more attention to, but we're not letting this go away. We're not letting it drop, but we are going to spend a lot more time on it today. More in the context of the history of all the dirty tricks and spying the government has been doing. I don't want to let the focus stay solely on PRISM and solely on Edward Snowden for two reasons. One, this could be the poison the well, a stunt that we're all expecting the government to try and do to diffuse this entire issue. But even if PRISM and Snowden is legit, if all the focus is on him and they get him, they can say, all right, issue is closed. Let's move on. We don't have to look at this anymore, like that Democratic representative was trying to do with the IRS scandal the other day. And he said, it's over and done with. No, nothing to see here. Move along, citizens. And there's a new wrinkle to this scandal. And this has already been reported in a couple of places so far. It's over at Washington's blog and a couple of other places here. What is the government doing with all of this data they save on you? Does it just sit there in their giant databases collecting dust? They're certainly not using it to prevent crimes, certainly weren't able to use it to prevent the terror attack in Boston. The head of the NSA is saying, oh, yes, take our word. We have thwarted real terror attacks with this information. And everybody says, okay, can you give us an example? And he goes, no, I can't do that. It'll betray our intelligence methods here, just like we can't tell you what the secret law is that made this all constitutional, which is nonsense. You cannot pass a law that says something that was unconstitutional is. And at this point, anybody who takes the government at their word, you're being just plain silly here. But it turns out the government has been sharing this information they collect on you, the American people, the law-abiding American people, is being shared with large corporations. If you say something critical of your banking establishment on Facebook, your banking establishment gets that. If you say anything critical about any of the large corporations, that is fed to them. Defense corporations especially are given the information about anybody who's critical of this rush to war and this massive spending on defense, and especially all of these very expensive weapon systems that don't work and are a complete waste of money, like the littoral combat ships, the F-22, the F-35. I'm sure I'm on all of these distribution lists. But they're basically anything that you might say that some corporation doesn't like, they're going to get it. This is from the same government that absolutely insists you don't need to know if there's genetically modified content in your food. And you don't need to know if vaccines are effective or not, or if they cause more harm than good. But by golly, that government is going to warn the corporations if you have bad thoughts about them, because that's all it is. It's bad thoughts. None of these people have actually done anything that could be considered a crime. They're just saying, I am not happy with the product and service of this corporation, and you're being snitched on by the government. Talk about a double standard. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about this massive, omnipresent spy operation by the government on you, the law-abiding American people. And we have been pointing out how the government simply cannot be trusted with your private information because they will use it for various purposes, profit from it, so forth and so on. We talked about the scandal up at the Asia-Pacific Economic Conference in Seattle back during the Clinton administration, where U.S. government intelligence agencies paid for by your tax dollars were spying on conference attendees, not to thwart crime, not to prevent terrorism, but to steal business secrets to give to Clinton's cronies. So we know, it's already documented. All these government people, insider trading and all the rest of this stuff, they cannot and should not be trusted with your private information. As it turns out, the FBI's use of the Patriot Act to secretly obtain Americans' business records, specifically the business records, has increased by 1,000% under Obama, 10 times. They're going out and getting your business records, from which they can derive information that will be useful to friends of the administration who are going after the same clients that you are. They can figure out, oh, this is what they're bidding on this contract, so you lower your bid just $1,000 under that, and you'll get the contract. What do business records of law-abiding Americans have to do with fighting crime or deterring terror? And the answer is absolutely nothing. It's just open season on the American people. You are being treated like property, along with all of your work product, your creativity, your inventiveness. They just want to go in and steal whatever they feel like stealing. Any ideas you may be working on, any new business approaches, methods, any new products, any new inventions, they just arrogate to themselves the right to go on in and loot you of your ideas to profit from. They're pillaging the population right now. Now, we're getting more and more of these stories. This one's from the Trenches World Report, where terror and surveillance experts are saying that contrary to the protestations of the director of the NSA, this surveillance they've been conducting plays very little role in foiling terror plots. The NSA tried to take credit for thwarting this bombing in London, and the London police came back and said, you guys had nothing to do with it. You're just trying to steal our thunder. We found this guy with regular, ordinary police work. I mean, if you think about how much data they have collected, it's one thing to collect it and store it. If you're a computer user with a lot of disk space on your computer, like I have because I used to be in computer animation, and you need a lot of disk room for that, you reach a point where all of a sudden you realize there's so much stuff on the disks, you forget stuff that's there. You have no way of finding it. And you have to wonder, they can save all this septillion bytes of data on the American people. How do they index it and search it in any kind of a meaningful, effective way? They may have the storage room, but they've also got a heck of a data management problem. And I'll give you one more reason why all this tracking of our online data is not going to produce useful results at all. Facebook is one of the companies that has been implicated in sharing all this information that you put on your Facebook page with the government. And you know, every once in a while you get these friend requests and links. And I just hit the yes button on all of them. I don't send out friend requests, but I get a lot of friend requests coming in, Facebook and LinkedIn and these other social sites. Yes, will you be my friend? Yeah, sure, why not? Click, 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 click. They're all yes. I don't know these people. I've never met them. I don't even really look at the names and faces. So if the NSA thinks they're building useful intelligence by mapping our online connections in Facebook and LinkedIn, they're not. It's junk. As I mentioned before, people lie on social media, especially if they're single, looking to hook up with somebody. The old cliche on the first date, oh, you look a lot older than your Facebook photo. Well, it was an old photo. I just never got a new one here. Yeah, but you look in your 20s on your Facebook picture, and looking at you in real life, you look like you're about 72. Well, you know, somebody stole my camera. I couldn't update the picture. I mean, people lie on the Facebook. It's a place where they can brag and have a larger image than they do in real life. Nonsense. Now, remember on Monday, we were talking about these polls that came out in the Washington Post and the New York Times that said, oh, yes, Americans are fine with all this Fourth Amendment violation, and Americans are fine being watched by everybody. And, of course, the reaction from the public was, come on, you got to be kidding here. And starting Tuesday and Wednesday and continuing in today, the corporate media polls are getting a little bit more real world. Our online poll that we had at whatreallyhappened.com yesterday came out, and 98% are absolutely opposed to the government spying on them. And now the more recent polls are saying, yeah, the majority of Americans are very unhappy about this. The majority decry the NSA spying, and they view Snowden as a patriot. And so it was just more attempts to lie and say, oh, you shouldn't be upset with violations of the Constitution. None of your friends and neighbors are. And that was yet another big lie coming out of the U.S. government and their lackeys in the corporate media. Now, here's a very interesting story. This came out of the Brisbane Times down in Australia. And the headline is, Australia gets a deluge of U.S. secret data, prompting a new data facility. They're building a new big box full of big disk drives down there. And what we're seeing here, this is an expansion of the operating philosophy of what was called Echelon. We're going to be talking about that a little bit more in the show here, where all of these intelligence agencies are sharing the data back and forth, and they evade their own national laws by parking their data outside their own country. And the Americans will spy on the Australians, and the Australians will spy on the Americans, and then they swap the data, and therefore they think themselves technically within the law regarding spying on their own people. I'm not spying on Americans, I'm spying on the Australians. They're spying on Americans and giving me the data. Therefore, we have evaded the Fourth Amendment. That's how they're thinking here. And this story out of the Brisbane Times is that because of a sudden deluge of U.S. secret data, they're having to build a new facility down there. It sounds to me like the NSA may be shifting their data out of the United States ahead of court orders to inspect it or delete it. So they're on the defensive already. They got to park their data someplace where we, the people, can't get at it and can't examine it, can't look at it, can't format the hard drives. Yes, there's data on your life, but it's not in this country. It's down in Australia. You can't do anything about that. So what we need to do is have sort of a reverse echelon, and that is that we'll promise the Australians to format the hard drives of any data on Australians here in the United States if they'll do the same thing regarding hard drives with data about U.S. citizens they find inside Australia. Hey, we're not damaging U.S. government property. We're getting rid of Australia's spy data. Sauce for the goose and so forth and so on. Now, I'm going to spend most of the rest of this hour going back into history. And I know right now there's a lot of focus put on Edward Snowden and PRISM. And there are one of two cases we need to be cautious about. At some point along here, we can expect the government to put out a poison the well propaganda stunt. They'll throw something out there that everybody will get on board and say, oh, how dare they, this is evil and bad, and then they'll discredit this story and then say, well, see, the whole issue was nonsense. It's all hysteria, there's nothing to worry about. We've seen this stunt before. Whether it was the umbrella dart gun at the House Select Committee on Assassinations or the fingerprint man in the Jim Garrison trial, this is a very old, time-worn, now obsolete propaganda tactic, but we're expecting it. So it could be that the PRISM documents in Edward Snowden are being set up to be discredited to try and diffuse the public anger over other NSA spying unconnected with PRISM, or by simply putting all the focus on PRISM and Edward Snowden, if they can nail him and destroy him, if he's legit, and then say, well, see, that's the end of it, we've properly dealt with this. So we need to be careful. And what our best approach is to go out and always look at and recapitulate all the separate evidence of all the government spying throughout history. So there is no single point of focus that can be used by the government to attack and discredit the justifiable outrage of the American people. So the point I'm making here is this scandal is not new. The U.S. government has been spying on law-abiding citizens for decades. We don't know when it began, but we know it's been going on for a long time. Up until recently, most Americans assumed, and we know what assume means, that the government only spied on people engaged in criminal or terror activity. You had to be a suspect, otherwise you were being left alone. Now we know better. The government is spying on everyone by every means possible. The American people must be quite a threat to the government if the government is acting that afraid of us. But I digress. Let's go back and look at many of the examples of how the United States government has gone rogue and abandoned the Constitution and views and treats the American people as property and potentially an enemy. Now, we've talked about this before. Back in the 1960s, the FBI ran a program called COINTELPRO. The name stood for Counterintelligence Program, but COINTELPRO had nothing to do with catching foreign spies, terrorists, or any aspect of organized crime. COINTELPRO targeted law-abiding Americans simply because they disagreed with the government's agenda, mostly the anti-Vietnam activists and the early civil rights movement. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're having a little bit of a history lesson here. And there will be a pop quiz next period, students. And we're talking about all the accumulated instances in which it has been exposed that the government routinely, blatantly, arrogantly ignores the Constitution to spy on law-abiding American citizens for no other reason than the government is just curious. No probable cause, no warrant, no oath or affirmation. Just, let's see what Joe's doing today. Let's type into his computer and, he's looking at some really juicy porn over there. We'll save that and threaten to show it to his wife unless he informs on his coworkers. It's one of the ways they build their network of informants here. So we're talking about COINTELPRO back in the 1960s. They were targeting various groups that were opposed to the U.S. government's agenda. Primarily, it was focused on the anti-war movement and on the early civil rights movement, mostly because the civil rights movement was starting to call attention to the fact that the Vietnam draft tended to put the black kids out on those front lines, and the white kids were in the safe rear echelon areas. And so they became targets. But COINTELPRO also targeted the early feminist movement, Native American rights movement. We all know how Leonard Peltier got railroaded into jail. All that stuff was going on. All of it funded by U.S. taxpayer dollars, which the FBI spent to mount covert operations that included informants on every college campus and in every major business. These infiltrators reported on the activities of those who disagreed with the government, and in many cases, they committed actual crimes themselves. These FBI informants, acts of sabotage, deception, to disrupt First Amendment activities. And, of course, one of the things we've always talked about is that phony coloring book that the FBI created to frame on the Black Panthers. It was filled with all these. It wasn't even a good coloring book. It looked like rough sketches, but it was all about blacks killing whites, and the police were always portrayed as pigs, and it was just spread all over the United States. When I was living with my parents in West Covina, we got one in the mail, and we should have been suspicious. We're white. I mean, not white, but we're white. We're not black. Why was this sent to us in the mail? And, of course, the media of the day was saying, those horrible Black Panthers, look at what they're thinking about. You shouldn't be listening to their concerns about race and discrimination. Yet another infamous COINTELPRO operation, we've talked about this one before, of course, was staging a riot at Disneyland to discredit the peace movement. And again, they went back to these FBI informants that they have on every college campuses, and by the way, they still do to this very day. So if you're going to college, that smelly kid with the dynamite trying to talk you into blowing something up, that's the FBI informant. So using their informants on these college campuses, they organized a large anti-war protest with students from all these different college campuses. Supposed to be peaceful, was supposed to be a march with signs along Harbor Boulevard outside of the Disneyland Park in Anaheim. This took place on August 6, 1970. Once the march was underway, these FBI informants who had infiltrated the anti-war groups and had gotten themselves leadership positions, they led the protest inside, started causing damage and mayhem. They took over Tom Sawyer Island. They were smoking pot out there where everybody could see it. And the media photographers were already there, waiting to turn this into the headline news across the nation. Those gosh darn so-called peace activists were beating up on Mickey Mouse and doing dope on Tom Sawyer's Island. And it discredited the anti-war movement and allowed the Vietnam War to continue for more years to the tune of 60,000 dead Americans, and we still don't know how many Vietnamese were killed. And I actually have a personal connection to this particular stunt because my best friend at the time invited me to go along to that protest, and after it was all over, admitted he was one of the FBI's informants who had organized it, and he tried to recruit me to be an FBI informant, which was the last day I ever spoke to that son of a bitch. Then we have all these stories about how COINTELPRO wrecked the careers of anyone who dared to speak out, and the most infamous case was that of actress Jean Seberg, who was an outspoken supporter of the civil rights movement at that particular time. And the White House was opposed to the civil rights movement because of its focus not only on equal work for equal pay, we can't have that in this country, but because it was calling attention to the disparity in the draft in terms of blacks predominantly at the front lines, whites predominantly in those rear echelon areas. And because Jean Seberg was a major celebrity, people were listening to her. And so the FBI decided they needed to silence her by discrediting her. Now, Jean Seberg was married, and she was pregnant. And the FBI decided to spread the rumor that Jean Seberg had cheated on her husband with one of the Black Panthers. And the child she was carrying was the child of one of the Black Panthers. And the FBI in Los Angeles literally asked permission from FBI in Washington, D.C. Can we go ahead and do this? FBI in D.C. said, yeah, it's a good idea. Wait until Jean's pregnancy is very obvious and everybody knows about it. So the FBI in Washington, D.C. approved this smear job. The story was then run by the Los Angeles Times propagandist Joyce Haber, who wrote the celebrity column. From there, it went to Newsweek and the international press. Going to take a break for commercials. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're going to grab a quick phone call before I get back to the history of government evildoing. So we're going to go with Tony in Indiana. Aloha, Tony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. I'll try to get through this real quick. I want to talk about the NSA and how it relates to the ever-continuing continuation of privatizing our commons, i.e. our national security.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Fourth Amendment binds the government against unreasonable searches and seizures, correct?
Yeah, but there has to be probable cause of suspicion supported by oath or affirmation, and the request for information or searching has to be specific. It says in particular describing the place to be searched and the items to be seized, and they can't just say everything.
Okay, well, I just thought of this. I'll let you think about it and run with it, and I'll hang up and listen. I think the reason that they privatized the NSA to this, I forget the name of this company this kid worked for, Ellen Root, or whatever the name of this private for-profit corporation that answers to shareholders, not we the people. Anyway, the government, in my opinion, the reason they're doing this is to escape liability of criminality, because they can say, oh, it's the corporation who's snooping on you.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? I'll hang up and listen.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. We know that the CIA maintains huge networks of proprietary companies that they own that are used as cover. I mean, if you remember back to when Bush outed Valerie Plame, the organization she worked for, which was Brewster Jennings' associate, they were tracking third world nuclear weapons. Okay, but it was a CIA front, which got destroyed by the outing of Valerie Plame. The Folders Travel Guides is a CIA proprietary, and they make really good travel guides. And it's also a great cover for people to go into other countries, and they say, you know, what are you doing here? And they say, oh, I'm with the Folders Travel Guides. And they say, oh, great, glad to have you here. We have a healthy tourist economy. Here, let me show you this, and let me show you that, and let me show you all this other stuff. A lot of National Geographic photographers are actually intelligence assets undercover. So this goes on all the time. But the reality is the government cannot duck legal culpability for violating the Constitution if they are, in fact, signing the checks for these private companies. So it's a moot point. If we, the American people, are furious at being spied on, we're not going to care about the fine technical details and cutouts and say, oh, it wasn't really our fault. It's just like the situation with IRS-gate, where they're trying to dump it on these two workers in Cincinnati. We don't care. The system as a whole is the problem. And we don't need to be tricked into arguing over fine details and technicalities anymore. We're too angry for that now. Alrighty, so getting back to COINTELPRO, and we're talking about how the FBI destroyed the career of actress Jean Seberg. She was a big star in Europe, big star in the United States of America, and the FBI, with permission from Washington, D.C., planted a phony story in the Los Angeles Times celebrity gossip column that Jean Seberg had cheated on her husband and was actually pregnant by one of the Black Panthers. Now, despite the sexual revolution of the 60s and the summer of love and the autumn of gonorrhea, interracial sex was still kind of considered taboo by most of mainstream America. And so when this story in the LA Times got picked up by Newsweek and the international press, it just absolutely destroyed Jean Seberg's career and reputation. And it was such a shock to her, she suffered a miscarriage and lost the baby. And they held a funeral for the baby, for the fetus, with an open casket. So everybody could see, yeah, it was a white kid. And Jean Seberg, her baby dead, and her career destroyed, attempted suicide several times and finally succeeded. Now, the FBI reported the operation as a huge success and sent a copy of the original Joyce Haber to the FBI in D.C. for their files. And the story might have stayed secret, but for one thing they overlooked. Jean Seberg's husband was a French diplomat, and he turned this into an international scandal until the FBI, in a very, very rare moment of candor, had to admit, yeah, yes, we did this dirty little trick, and we're sorry. We apologize, and we won't do it again. And they issued an apology of sorts in the LA Times, the same newspaper they had used to launch this hoax. And the actual statement of the FBI in the Los Angeles Times was, quote, "The days when the FBI used derogatory information to combat advocates of unpopular causes have long since passed. We are out of that business forever." And, of course, when the Church Committee was looking into all of these abuses, when the COINTELPRO scandal broke, the Church Committee came up and said, no, the FBI is still doing this stuff. So COINTELPRO was made public when documents about it were leaked to the media. And the FBI actually succeeded in convincing the corporate media to sit on the story and not report on it, but eventually, as word spread by word of mouth, and in what passed then for the alternative media, eventually the newspapers were forced to publish the story. Congress was forced to hold hearings because most Americans considered the actions of COINTELPRO not what America was supposed to be about, and it brought the entire federal government to the edge of outright illegitimacy in the eyes of the American people. And, of course, the current scandal today is considerably worse. But when they held all these hearings, all this stuff came out. The smearing of Jean Seberg, the phony coloring book, the staged riot at Disneyland, and the FBI, quite in contrast to the image of the FBI we're given by film and TVs. They were out there using psychological warfare, smearing people, forging documents, planting false evidence in reports, wrongful imprisonment, acts of outright violence, and even assassinations. And in the wake of the congressional hearings into COINTELPRO, Congress passed strict laws saying the FBI cannot do these actions anymore. Unfortunately, all those laws were rescinded during the Clinton administration. So Bill Clinton is not going to be able to duck any involvement in this growing scandal. Now, we've talked about Echelon before, and I'm going to touch on it real quick. Basically, Echelon started kind of cranking up for real quite a while ago. It was certainly going again during the Clinton administration. And it is a network of intercept stations for satellite communications set up in 5 countries: Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Covers pretty much all of the world. Echelon in the United States is operated by the NSA. In other countries, it goes by other names, such as Five Eyes, and it's designed to spy on private communications, and the way they avoided legal restrictions against spying on their own people is they play a little game of swap. The Americans will spy on the Australians and give that information to the Australian intelligence agencies, while the Australians spy on the Americans and give that information to the American intelligence agencies. So they can sit there and say, hey, we're legal. We're not actually spying on Americans, just, foreign government is just giving us this information. So this gets us to the age of the Internet. Now, the advent of widespread data communication at the consumer level was never, ever supposed to happen. The basic system for what we know as the Internet began as a Defense Department Advanced Research Project Agency program to develop a reliable system of data communication among the military and defense contractors that would not be interrupted in case of a major war. This required a distributed system with no central switching routing center that could be bombed, and one which automatically reconfigured itself to get around damage. This was called the ARPANET. And it was impossible to censor or control, but because at that time it was a government toy only, nobody was concerned. So ARPANET began in 1969, and it was confined to the Department of Defense, government labs, and military contractors, and universities that were engaged in Defense Department research. Now, by 1990, the government became alarmed at the large number of former defense workers who had left for the private sectors, gone home or to their new office, and set up links to ARPANET to stay in touch with their colleagues by email, and FTP and Usenet, which were the predominant modes of using the Internet back then. The ARPANET was breaking free into the wild. So the next year, with the funding for the backbone servers, came a new set of rules over just who and who was not allowed to access this mass communication system that had no central control point. Now, the companies running the backbone servers rejected the rules, told ARPA to keep their checks, and they took the backbone private. In hacker lore, this is called the Great Revolt, the day when the ARPANET became the Internet, and it became publicly available to all. Now, the United States government officially ended their involvement with the NET project in 1990. And the problem is, of course, we, the American people, gained a mass communication system that could not be controlled or censored by the United States government, and almost immediately the government tried to reverse that. Now, in 2001, the FBI launched a program called Magic Lantern as a part of their larger Operation Carnivore, to go out and just scarn all the information they could get off the Internet. Magic Lantern was a virus that was installed on targeted computers to record all the keystrokes, get all the passwords, get their PGP keys, send them back to the FBI where they were stored in a database containing emails, chats, blogs, anything else the FBI was stealing from your computer. Now, like COINTELPRO, Carnivore and Magic Lantern were deployed not against criminals, but against political dissidents. Network associates who make the McAfee antivirus software worked with the FBI to make sure Magic Lantern would not be detected by their antivirus software. When this became known, McAfee issued a public denial. But cyber criminals started disguising their malware to look like Magic Lantern, and were thus able to basically stream right by all the antivirus programs that were on the market at the time. And this led citizens' computers wide open to hacking and identity theft, which apparently is a small price to pay to guarantee the FBI's access to your private information. And the backlash from this led to the FBI abandoning that program. Now, there was another aspect to all of this. The power of personal computers made strong encryption possible for ordinary Americans. Strong encryption poses a problem for government agencies wanting to keep an eye on Americans who disapprove of the government's keeping an eye on them. Or worse, those Americans who had actual evidence of government wrongdoing they were trying to make public, which is how I got involved in all of this all the way back in 1994 when I had evidence that Vincent Foster did not commit suicide in Fort Marcy Park. And like a law-abiding citizen doing what was right, I tried to point out we had a murder here, which ended my career in Hollywood for the first time. So, research into cryptography came under tight government control, and as of the mid-1980s, became one of the few areas in which you must get government permission before you publish any work you've done in cryptography. They wanted to control the codes that were out there. Now, as I've mentioned before, decoding a message is a two-step process. First, the method of encryption must be determined. Once you have that, then the specific key for the specific message must be found. Of the two steps, the first step is by far the hardest. And we talked before about how the Allies did not break the German Enigma code until they succeeded in capturing an actual machine from the German submarine U-559. This gave them the method. Once they had the method, finding the keys was very easy, using this giant mechanical calculator called the bomb for its constant ticking over there at Bletchley Park. So this machine, the bomb, was based partly on theoretical work by Alan Turing and allowed the Enigma messages to be read. And here's where the story gets interesting. At the end of the war, the United States and Britain made presents of these captured German Enigma machines to friendly governments, not mentioning that any messages encoded on those machines could be read by the U.S. and Britain. Nice way to treat your friends and allies, isn't it? Now, in the 1990s, there was a huge scandal in Europe involving a company called Crypto AG. Numerous information breaches of communications encoded with these machines had raised the suspicion that the machines were compromised by intelligence agencies, including the NSA. Crypto AG's management strongly denied the allegations, but James Bamford, in his book, The Puzzle Palace, confirmed the story. The NSA had paid the head of Crypto AG a huge chunk of money to add a backdoor to their systems. So strong encryption is a problem, even with all their acres and acres of computers. It's very, very hard to break a new code if you don't know the method. And so how the government got around this was trying to decide for you what method of encryption you would use. And the first time was DES. Remember all that stuff, the Data Encryption Standard. Everybody will use this encryption system, and we promise you it's secure. And then, of course, the government came out and mandated a limit to the key size, because the way DES operates, the longer the key, the more secure it is. And the government said, you don't need a key size longer than 64 bits. Really, you don't need that at all. And then later on, somebody deduced that there was an additional packet in the file header of the encrypted product, which was called the work reduction packet, which actually contained your encryption key, re-encrypted using a key only the NSA had. As personal computers became far more powerful, DES was eventually seen as insecure due to that limited key length, and people just stopped using that. So in 1993, the NSA announced a new encryption system for the masses, the Clipper chip. And the Clipper chip was, everybody's going to use it. It's a hardware implementation. You don't have to worry about software. It's going to be built into all your computers and tablets, and you will have secure encryption. And you can feel safe and believe that your traffic is private. And the way they tried to sell this to the American people is they were going to take your encryption key, and you were going to be forced to turn it over to the government, but you were going to break it in two halves. And one government agency would get one half of the key, and another government agency would get another half of the key. And there would be all kinds of paperwork and constitutional restrictions before any government agency could get both halves of the key to put it back together to read your traffic. And it sounded really good, except that cryptographic experts pointed out if you had one half of the key, you could derive the other half of the key with enough computer power. And NSA buys more supercomputers than anybody else in the world. Then in 1994, a guy by the name of Matt Blaze published a paper exposing that the Clipper chip included in all of its messages yet another data packet identified as LEAF, which stood for Law Enforcement Access Field. And like the work reduction packet in the DES, LEAF contained your encryption key that you used to encode the message, so the NSA could read your message in an instant without even having to use their computers. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're going through the history of all the times the government has rigged things to spy on you. It began long time ago. Most Americans convinced, hey, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm sure the government is not spying on you. Yeah, they were spying on everybody. So we're talking about the beginnings of the Internet and personal computers and how this posed such a problem for a government that was already so paranoid of the American people they had to watch everything that you're doing. Your business records, your sexy messages to your significant other, and all the rest of that stuff was being grabbed. In 1999, Microsoft issued Service Pack 5 for Windows NT 4.0. which had a standard encryption system built in that everybody is going to use, and therefore the NSA already had the method, which is the hard part in decoding messages. Microsoft neglected to strip out what's called the symbol table information for their standard cryptographic module. The file was called advapi.dll, Dynamically Linked Library. When software experts examined the symbol table, they discovered that in addition to the Microsoft encryption key, a second key existed that was labeled NSA key. This second key would allow anyone using it full access to the Microsoft encryption system, able to read any traffic encrypted with Microsoft encryption, and worse, they could go right past Windows security to access the computer remotely. Now, Dr. Nico van Someren later found a similar extra key in Windows 2000. Microsoft, of course, denies everything. Are we going to believe that? And subsequently, it has turned out that every Microsoft operating system since Windows 95 has had similar backdoors built into it. And at this point, we can presume the same has been done to the Apple computers. A lot of people are saying, well, it's a good reason to go to Linux. How do we know that the packaged off-the-shelf Linuxes don't have backdoors in them? I know a lot of people say, well, if you get the source code for Linux and compile it yourself, you should be safe. And actually, that's not true, because I remember an incident from back in the 1990s where there was a distribution of Linux that was all source code, but they provided the compiler, which had to be binary. And it was discovered when the compiler compiled your operating system, it would add things in there to the executables you were unaware of. All kinds of ways to do this stuff here. Now we're getting a story, in fact, a member just put this up at whatreallyhappened.com, that some of the information coming out of the NSA now is suggesting Microsoft may have lied to Skype users around the world regarding the security of Skype. And some of the documents Snowden has put out there is saying Skype has a backdoor, so they can monitor what you're doing there. Oh, my stars and heavens, the NSA is listening in when we talk to our niece and nephew over there in London every Sunday. Horror of horrors, what must they think about us when we make silly faces at the little children? Now, none of these government systems to read your private messages has anything to do with crime. Real criminals, whether they're drug lords or spies, know better than to use this stuff. Hello, More America, welcome back to the show. And we're going through a history of all of these times when the government has been caught spying on ordinary, law-abiding Americans. And I want to emphasize that phrase, law-abiding Americans, because none of these systems we're describing have anything to do with crime or terror. Real criminals, drug lords, Wall Street insider trading, foreign spies, they know better than to use any encryption system where the method is already known to the enemy. Even if there were no backdoors, work reduction packets, or leaf. The agenda of DES, Clipper, NSA key was to reserve to the government the ability to look into the private lives of ordinary, law-abiding Americans anytime they wanted to. That's the agenda. They know the criminals are not using these off-the-shelf encryption systems, whether it's PGP or whatever. If you do have something to hide, and right now it is the U.S. government that is the biggest threat to your personal business data, you're going to have to invest the time to learn coding and come up with your own encryption system. Doesn't even have to be that good. It just has to be different. And that'll jam up the system. Now, the government is out there saying, you can trust us with all your personal information. We would never misuse these back doors they've built into your private life. But history shows otherwise. We talked about this a little earlier in the week. J. Edgar Hoover, when he was head of the FBI, was legendary for his private secret files that he used to blackmail politicians, including President Kennedy. Kennedy, like Clinton, was catching a little on the side. And Hoover had the photos of it and used it to coerce President Kennedy to change certain policies. This is why no president dared replace Hoover as head of the FBI. And that was just done with ordinary paper files and photographs, not with instant access into every single American's computer. Remember back during the whole Whitewater scandal and Monica Lewinsky, somebody got hold of a recording of one of Bill Clinton's and Monica Lewinsky's phone sex sessions and used it to pressure Clinton to order the FBI to stop looking for Israel's top mole in the administration. A lot of people thought it was Rahm Emanuel. So this is why you can't trust the government with your private information. We've already talked about the Apex scandals. So the point is, the government cannot and should not be trusted with your private information. Once they have the keys to your communications, they will steal your ideas and your business secrets and use them just as readily as the TSA loots items from your luggage. We're going to grab a quick phone call here. Alex in Texas. Aloha, Alex. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I was calling because yesterday I got a phone call from my cousin because I'm pretty far ahead with the alternative website that I'm going to set up. So I was asking him for some information, and he told me to look up something called the Consciousness Web because he said that this whole NSA thing is geared around where our military bases are placed around the world and the kind of signals that they can receive from their satellites that we're sending off with the aid of all of our technical devices. He said to me that in essence they can read your mind.
Okay, I know what you're talking about, and it is worth a mention, although it doesn't work the way it used to. We have to take a break for commercials, but when we come back, I will talk a little bit about this system. It's now obsolete, but I'll talk about this system. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And to go back to what Alex in Texas was talking about, there was indeed a system developed by America's intelligence agencies back in the days when we had cathode ray tubes on our computer monitors. And because of the high voltage involved in getting the cathode ray tube to work, coming off the flyback transformer and just that electron beam to the front of the screen, these monitors put out a great deal of radio noise. Business-grade monitors tried to shield that because there was concern that along with all the X-rays coming off that front phosphor screen that long use of these monitors could provoke some health risks. But the consumer-level CRTs were not shielded. And because it was simply a raster scan, there was a device that was developed where they could park outside your house with a very sensitive receiver listening to the noise from your cathode ray tube and reproduce what you were seeing on the screen. Now, in the days of these flat panel devices and more complex graphic cards and constantly changing scan rates, it's a more difficult problem to do, and in any event, they don't need it. With all these backdoors in the computers, they can call up what you're seeing on your computer at any time with a remote device. But yes, they did actually have a device where they could sit outside your house and see what was being displayed on your computer screen at that moment. Alrighty, so getting up to the present era, and we have DOJ Gate spying on reporters in the Congress, NSA Gate spying on everybody else, PRISM spying on all your computer stuff. And again, why it's an outrage now is these stories have been reported throughout the years. And always the American people were sort of lulled into this idea that, hey, I'm not doing anything wrong, I'm not committing a crime, I'm not a terrorist, I may be obnoxious and annoying and overbearing, but I'm not a terrorist, the government has no interest in me. Oh, yeah, they do. They called it total information awareness. And then, of course, when there was a backlash from that, total information awareness as a name went away, but the practice continued here. So we have the Department of Justice looking at reporters' phone records from the Congress. And I think it's a given they were recording the content. For the reasons I pointed out before, how do you know it's a real contact and not a wrong number? Unless you've got the contact. And the scale of those data storage facilities are way, way too huge if all they're saving is that metadata. And it's not investigation into a few suspects of crimes. It's an investigation into everybody. And again, it's got nothing to do with crime and terror. That's why everybody is calling nonsense as the head of the NSA gets out there and says, oh, yeah, we're finding terrorists with this. No, you're not. Real terrorists, real spies, real criminals, real Wall Street insiders know better than to use anything off the shelf for communications and infrastructure, for encryption. They know better. They're not going to do it. This is all about watching you, and you should be outraged. You have a constitutional right to privacy. You've got Obama out there saying, well, we can't be 100% secure and 100% private. We're going to have to make a decision there. My decision is, I'll tell you what, government minds its own darned business, and I'll shoot the burglars coming in through the window myself. There's the deal. The Constitution does not promise us security. It does promise us privacy. It's the Bill of Rights. It's not the Bill of Suggestions. Now, before we go to a phone call, this is a story that's just popped up over at Blacklisted News. I'm sorry, beforeitsnews.com. Yesterday, Glenn Beck made this ominous announcement that he had a new whistleblower insider who was going to basically have the story of the century. Got a lot of competition for that one. But beforeitsnews.com is reporting, and it's a rumor, I emphasize this is a rumor, that the NSA used information gleaned from Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court Roberts to blackmail him into changing his vote on Obamacare. Now, Glenn Beck promised to reveal this today. We haven't seen it yet, but we're all waiting to see if that's what's going on. And remember, earlier in the week, I posed this as a possibility, that everybody was scratching their heads at the way Chief Justice Roberts, who'd been adamantly opposed to Obamacare, and then at the last minute he reverses himself and comes up with this very tortured justification about why it's constitutional for the government to order you to buy health insurance, and then promptly left for a vacation out of the country for 2 weeks. And I asked that question, did the NSA have something on Roberts? And if this story out of Before It's News is true, the answer is yes. And there's the real danger. Look at how J. Edgar Hoover, with just a bunch of paper files, was able to just influence the government for Hoover's benefit. Not ours, not yours, not mine, not the taxpayers, for Hoover's benefit. Imagine what the NSA, what the head of the NSA can do with all that information he's picked up on every single member of the United States Congress, every judge in every court, every occupant of the White House, every official anywhere, what they can do with that. And that's why Congress ought to order the immediate destruction of this facility and its contents. Sell off all the hard drive surplus. Going to take a phone call here. John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha from the beautiful island here.
It is a lovely island. I've been there.
I've been reading up on Congressman Peter King. He's calling for the prosecution of both Mr. Snowden and the newspaper chap who revealed this story initially. But I have a question for Mr. King, and maybe you can pose it. Didn't Scooter Libby reveal not just Valerie Plame Wilson's name, but the project she was on? And that came directly from Dick Cheney. Should these two be tried in the same manner he's calling for these two other people?
Well, they should. They should.
But disclosure also closed down the CIA operation damaging America's security.
Yeah, they absolutely did, and that was I think it was Brewster Jennings and Associates, and whatever their overt front purpose was supposed to be, what that organization really was the CIA's main facility for tracking third world nuclear weapons and where they were going. And by outing Valerie Plame and destroying Brewster Jennings' cover, they basically hamstrung the ability of the CIA to find out who really did have nuclear weapons and who did not. Now, in the context of wanting to convince the world that Iran is building nuclear weapons, certainly Israel had an agenda for Brewster Jennings to be shut down so that they couldn't go to them and say, can you verify whether or not Iran has nuclear weapons? And Brewster Jennings would have said, no, we have no evidence of it, and that would have undermined this whole go to war against Iran agenda. So there were a couple of overlapping goals with the people involved in this. But yeah, if it's wrong for Snowden and Glenn Greenwald to do it, it's certainly wrong for the outing of Valerie Plame, and it's a double standard. But then, Peter King was all, great for terrorism when it was the IRA doing it. And the problem I have with Peter King coming out saying, we've got to arrest this person and that person, he's all upset and angry about the political embarrassment here. But he doesn't seem to have a problem at all with the fact that this NSA spying violates the First Amendment, the 4th Amendment, the 5th Amendment, the 9th Amendment, and the 10th Amendment. This is batting 500 in terms of trashing the Bill of Rights, and Peter King doesn't seem to have a problem with that.
It just shows to me that lots of these congressmen just have the height of hypocrisy. Whatever suits them is they go the way they go and what they run with.
That's the job requirement right there. They're the finest politicians money can buy.
Yep. Okay, then. I just thought I'd ask you your opinion on those points. Cheers, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and good luck. It is a beautiful island, Barbados, there, and I've been a big fan of Monget rum ever since. All righty, getting back to the corporate media, of course, is still out there trying to demonize Snowden, so you wouldn't want to listen to anything he has to say, and they were trying to link him. Oh, he was a Ron Paul supporter. How could you listen to a Ron Paul supporter? Then, of course, they remembered how many people actually were Ron Paul supporters, and they're not going to get traction on that one. So now the new demonization is that Edward Snowden, actually supported this idea of ending America's financial aid to Israel. Oh, how could you do that? And that one's going to flop, too, because a lot of Americans are tired of all this aid to Israel. The American taxpayer has been forced to give Israel 4 times the entire cost of the Apollo moon program, and we don't have a giant leap for mankind out of any of that money, or even the modern equivalent of Velcro. It's just money that's gone out there, and it's made enemies of the United States around the world. Because these people are tired of seeing their families and loved ones blown up before their very eyes and seeing Made in the USA stamped on that shrapnel. So the smear job is continuing, and that is why I'm saying whether Snowden is legit or not, and I don't know yet, but if we put all the focus on Snowden and PRISM, we give the government an easy handle to try and steer and derail and discredit the entire scandal. And the whole point of that long diatribe I just got done doing is it isn't just the exposure about PRISM. It's been going on all along. There is massive evidence of this if you want to go out and find it for yourself. Now, supposedly a bipartisan group of senators is proposing a bill to force the declassification of this so-called secret court order behind the ordering of all U.S. phone records from Verizon for 3 months. And we now know this was a continuation of an ongoing policy. Every 3 months, Verizon got another one of these orders. And if they're doing it to Verizon, I guarantee you it's being done to all the phone carriers. Because it's a sweep, it's a dragnet. And that doesn't work if you're on only one of the phone companies. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently over in New York, they're considering a bill to ban anonymous online commenting on news stories and on blogs. I'm not aware of any place where you can comment. Every place I've commented, you have to sign in with Facebook or something like that. And I'm not worried about it, but I don't think this is really all that significant, but New York is sort of getting into the Michael Bloomberg mindset. We can't fix the economy, we can't bring back the jobs, we can't do anything useful, so we're going to prove that we deserve our huge salaries and all of our perks by passing silly little laws on really stupid things like the size of your soft drinks and whether you can be anonymous in commenting online or not. And it's like the law of the hammer. You know what the law of the hammer is? If you give a small child a hammer, everything they encounter needs pounding. And it's like the law of the legislature. If you give somebody the authority to make laws, everything they encounter needs legislation. Until 200 some odd years on, and you've got so many laws in the country, you can't live your life without breaking something somewhere. Anyway. Now, earlier in the week, we talked about this, yet another aspect of this complete surveillance mentality that we have in this Orwellian state we are now living in. How the Internal Revenue Service had placed an order for all of this spy equipment that included things like coffee trays with hidden cameras, cameras that were hidden in planters, in clocks, not to spy on taxpayers, and I'm sure they're doing a lot of that anyway. They're certainly data mining your Facebook pages right now. They were going to spy on their own employees in their own Internal Revenue Service cafeterias. Make sure they're not sitting there on their little laptops and reading those websites that talk about how the 16th Amendment was never actually ratified. And it provoked a huge backlash, understandably. and certainly outrage among the employees of the Infernal Revenue Service, who are loyal little thugs roaming the countryside, stealing pigs and chickens for His Highness Sir Guy of Gisborne and Prince John. And they were very offended by this, as well they should be. And due to the huge exposure we gave the story out here in the independent media, the IRS has now canceled the order for that spying equipment. So all you tax collectors out there, you owe us one for protecting your privacy, certainly better than the government is protecting ours at this point. Now, among the revelations that have come out from Edward Snowden was confirmation of something, and again, this had been reported before, where the U.S. government has been hacking into China's computers far longer than the allegations China is hacking into ours. And now Hong Kong says they want some answers. Apparently, Snowden is now a big hero. He's still in China. We thought we'd heard he was going either to Iceland or Russia, but apparently China says you're welcome to stay here. There's even a big rally in support of him, big hero. And again, I'm very hesitant and cautious to turn him into the personification of the scandal, because that makes it too easy for the government to diffuse the scandal by going after him. We want to have a broad front in this assault on the government's assault on our privacy. But this is kicking off all across the world here right now. There's an article over in The Guardian on how intelligence gathered by the British intelligence agencies are already out of control. And their equivalent of the NSA, the GCHQ, are abusing the privacy rights of British subjects to the same extent the NSA is. And, of course, the GCHQ and the NSA are already partnered through Echelon and all of these other programs. And of course, GCHQ operates that Menwith Hill Echelon station in North Yorkshire. And it's the NSA's largest eavesdropping center outside the United States of America. And we have an NSA Echelon station here on the island of Oahu. They're building a huge data facility up there. There's one down in Australia in a place called, it's either Pine Ridge or Pine Hill, Pine Gap, Australia. Huge NSA facility there. If you know where to look, you can see these things on Google Earth. And by the way, if you go over and you look at the northwest corner of Australia, you will see an absolutely gigantic antenna array. In fact, it showed up in one of the photos taken from the space shuttle, this gigantic, just huge antenna array, listening to the world's shortwave and medium wave broadcasts. They're just listening to everything here right now. Now, Chris Pyle, who was blowing the whistle on this domestic spying back in the 1970s, Snowden is not the first. And basically Chris Pyle came out and said, you know, be wary of attacks on the NSA's critics, and he's certainly right about that. We're seeing the corporate media going after Snowden. Oh, he's a Ron Paul supporter. He thinks we should stop giving all of our money to Israel, and the rest of that. And Pyle is saying the NSA is known for attacking their critics instead of addressing the problems. And that's true of the government as a whole. Again, it was only the outrage of the American people that forced Congress to deal with COINTELPRO. And that's why it's important for you to be outraged right now. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm just putting up this story at whatreallyhappened.com. This is a flashback to CBS News in 2006, where Joe Biden is out there saying, wiretapping is wrong, wiretapping American citizens, oh, this is a horrible thing. And remember, Obama was saying the same thing in 2007. Oh, we can't have warrantless searches of America's private information. They were lying. They love this stuff. They absolutely do. So, in the context of the Constitution, use it or lose it, we have to stand up and say, it's time to challenge this unconstitutional behavior by the government, because if the government is not complying with the limits imposed on it by the Constitution, then they're not a legal government. That's the deal. That's what that Constitution says. We the people, remember those 3 words written extra large up at the top of there, we the people will let you, the government, be the caretaker of our nation, and take care of the nation for us and the nation, as long as you follow these rules. That's the deal. That's the original contract with America. If the government doesn't want to conform to the rules, they can resign or abdicate. But we understand with a contract, you don't accept a contract and then just blithely ignore the requirements, which is what our government is doing. And we have to stand up for that Constitution. Nobody in government will stand up for it. The government is wholly on the side of the corporations that just think all this Bill of Rights stuff is a huge amount of nonsense, and how much better and more efficient life would be without that silly little Bill of Rights things. Remember, it was only 2 months ago we saw these trial balloon articles in the New York Times and MSNBC about it's really time to just get rid of the Constitution. The federal government would be much more efficient without all of this falderall about rights to privacy and presumption of innocence and the rest of this stuff. Well, okay, throw that Constitution in the shredder if you want, but don't forget, the authority of the federal government is based on that Constitution. If that Constitution is gone, so too is the lawful authority of the federal government. The federal government doesn't see it that way. We're the government. We're here. We've got all the guns and the hollow point ammunition, and we're taking your guns away, and we'll just do whatever we want, and you can do nothing about it. Now, Larry Klayman is mounting all of these class action lawsuits against the NSA surveillance programs, and ultimately it looks like every single living American with a wire of any kind coming into their home, or even a cell phone, wireless, Wi-Fi, whatever, is part of the class. And the amount of damages being asked is already going up. The total of the first 2 class action lawsuits he has filed is $23 billion with a B in damages against the NSA, which is a rather interesting coincidence because that is exactly the amount of money the Pentagon is asking for their 5-year cybersecurity plan. And they want to go out there and protect computer networks. Not yours, theirs, obviously. They don't want your computer network protected. They want it wide open so they can spy on you, which is why all these Viagra ads and porn ads and everything flood into your mailbox and all these viruses are coming in. They don't want you protected. They want you wide open. And what's really more alarming here is that you have this guy, the director of the NSA, the one who was already caught lying under oath to Congress something like 14 times denying this surveillance was going on. And now he's out there saying, well, yes, I lied before, but you can take my word that all of this is necessary to stop terror. And in addition to being in charge of the NSA, this guy, Alexander, he's also in charge of the Central Security Service, the U.S. Cyber Command, the Navy's 10th Fleet, the 24th Air Force, and the 2nd Army. This guy, talk about power mad. He's got his own army right now. And his model of cybersecurity is that the Internet has to be under complete and total government control, which means websites like mine are just going to go away. And we have, by the way, over the last couple of days, we are being hit with absolutely relentless attacks on our server. We were actually off the net for about an hour and a half yesterday after the radio show. We got knocked completely off, and we're literally, it's a fist fight trying to keep all these people off of our servers and off of our systems here. Let's see. Now, as we reported, the Deputy Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Morell, has resigned for the usual, family pressure, blah, 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 but it seems rather interesting timing that just as all these revelations about massive intelligence agency spying on America comes up, that he decides maybe he wants to get out of town. Over in the European Union, rather, they are shocked and angry by this unaccountable U.S. surveillance on their lives. And it's now known the United States intelligence agencies, CIA, NSA, the rest of it, are data mining the cloud. Remember when the cloud came along and I said, you are a fool if you use it. Because once your data is on that remote server, it is wide open to the people who own the cloud and to any government agents that want to come along and take a peek at all your little pictures of you and your wife doing those little private moments. Or your business secrets is really what they're after. We make fun of the perverts at FBI and CIA drooling over scantily clad pictures of your spouse. But what they really want are your business secrets, just like they did up at APEC. wow, this guy's got a great business idea. I better buy stock in his company. And by the way, if the United States is data mining the cloud, they're grabbing more than just phone metadata, aren't they? Because your phone metadata isn't in the cloud. Germans are now viewing the United States on the same level as the Stasi, the much hated and feared East German secret police, who were so totally overboard in their constant watching of everybody. Do you know they collected samples of your smells? I'm not kidding. They had it where they'd go into your home when you were away, and they had this little chemical process where they could literally capture samples of everybody's aroma to give to dogs when you're running through the forest and they need to chase you. Or who knows what they were doing. It was just another reason to say, oh, we need more money for our scent collection program. It's just amazing stuff. When the Germans are saying that you live in a dictatorship, you'd better be paying attention. All righty, let's see. And as a matter of fact, the government of many European nations are now warning their citizens and businesses, do not use the cloud because of the risk that U.S. intelligence agencies are going to obtain your personal secrets, business secrets, financial records. Completely unrestrained. This is probably going to slam all these cloud-based services. Nobody's going to trust the cloud. You were a fool to trust the cloud to begin with, but now everybody knows it. Gee, I hate being right all the time. Interesting article that was over at From the Trenches World Report. 22 nauseating quotes from hypocritical establishment politicians about the NSA spying scandal. And it's basically a collection of all these quotes of all these lackeys for the NSA. Probably the NSA's got dirty pictures on them or compromising phone calls or something. So their loyalty will be unquestioned here. And it's just a collection of all these statements about how, really, it's just no big deal that we're watching every single thing that you do. And they start off, of course, with Barack Obama's quote, I think it's important to understand that you can't have 100% security and then have 100% privacy and zero inconvenience. We're going to have to make some choices as a society. My choice, Mr. Obama, is that you, the government, mind your own damn business, and I'll shoot the burglars as they come in the window. Is that a deal? The Constitution does not promise us security. It promises us privacy. And if you do not want to comply with the rules and restrictions and limits of the Constitution, have the decency to resign. I know that'll put Biden in the Oval Office, and he's no improvement, but maybe we can get him to resign as well. If you don't want to play by the rules, don't be the government. Don't pretend to be the government. Let's see. We already talked about Peter King and all the stupid things he's saying, and he's got one more to add to the pool. Apparently, Peter King is calling, first of all, he's saying that the only people who are upset about this NSA spying are Republicans and conservatives because they want to go after Obama, and they hate him because he's black, and they're pulling every excuse out of the hat they can find. And now he's basically saying that anybody who's upset over the NSA spying, you're just being a bunch of Michael Moores. He's saying it's dangerous for you to criticize your government. No, it isn't. Criticizing the government is how we protect the nation from the government. All right, from NSA Gate over to State Gate, and the revelation that apparently a lot of the people working for Hillary Clinton's State Department are not very nice people. And there's a huge cover-up, investigations blocked. Now it's come out that Hillary Clinton's State Department hired people with known criminal records to put into the diplomatic corps. I don't have a criminal record. I had an unpaid traffic ticket when I was back in college, and that turned out to be a botched police record. They would never hire me for the State Department. But look at all the criminals they've got hiring there. And, of course, this goes back to that infamous photo from the Clinton administration of Hillary Clinton posed before the White House Christmas tree with a known cocaine smuggler, Jorge Cabrera, who may have been dealing in illicit drugs, but he was a loyal Clinton donor, and that's why he got invited to the White House. You and I, who do not smuggle drugs, we don't get invited to the White House. As I understand it, they've even called off all the public tours. They're that afraid of you. And I'm going to keep that picture, and I'm going to make sure it's prominent should Hillary decide to run in 2016. But with the fallout from Stategate and Benghazi-gate, Hillary's potential as a candidate in 2016 is evaporating just about as fast as the credibility of the government as a whole. Now, we've already got one name. The U.S. ambassador to Belgium, Howard Gutman, has been named as one of these misbehaving State Department employees. He's accused of soliciting sex not only from prostitutes, but from minor children. He's a little pedophile. He likes the little kiddies. This is being reported by NBC. Now, I'm not all that upset about him going after a prostitute. You know, foreign country, lonely, whatever. You know, but little kids, I have to draw the line there. I have a real problem with that. I'm kind of a easygoing, you know, everybody find their own happiness kind of guy. But when it comes to little kids, I have some old, primitive, primal instincts that kick in at that point. And I don't care if he's with prostitutes. The prostitutes are there by choice. They're getting paid. But little kids, that's pretty sick. And apparently the State Department was trying to protect him. Apparently not very well. And so we have this story over here at CBS where they're basically saying they now have documents that show the State Department was covering up allegations of illegal and inappropriate behavior within their ranks. And the number of cases of misconduct by State Department employees around the world numbers 70,000. That's 7 with 4 zeros after it. That's a management problem. When you have that many bad people on your staff and you're not doing anything about it. Can't the State Department find any more decent, honorable people? Well, yeah, but then they wouldn't sit there and do what they're told to do when it comes to gun running and opium out of Afghanistan and all the rest of that other stuff. Kind of a goes withness. When you get the kind of people who will go along with all these evil plots, they kind of have evil personal lives. I think that's what's coming back to haunt them. Speaking of evil personal lives, apparently up in Toronto, the police have launched a major sweep against gangs under the code name Project Traveler. And they've arrested a whole bunch of people. But what really gives it away is that they raided the apartment building where this video that showed the mayor of Toronto smoking a crack pipe was supposedly being kept. And you know what's really amazing? CTV, which was reporting this story, then adds the thing, CTV has not seen the alleged video and we cannot substantiate its authority. And that's the real motive for the raids. And if CTV has not seen the video, it's because they don't want to. See no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil, because it took a single web search to find multiple copies, one of which is linked to the front of whatreallyhappened.com. So you can judge for yourself there. CTV is, we don't know there's a video, and we don't know what it shows really. We're sure the mayor of Toronto's a swell guy who would never, ever, ever, ever do something like that. Boy, remember when they got the mayor of Washington, D.C. on video smoking crack, and they still reelected him? Or at least that's what those electronic voting machines told us. All righty, let's see here. Let's talk about the economy a little bit. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Speaking of the economy, last night around the world, starting in Asia and Australia, the stock market got hammered, and somehow miraculously here in the United States of America, where this economic meltdown began back in 2008 with the mortgage-backed security fraud, by golly, our stock market is soaring. It's up there. All is happiness and well, and all those banks who own that stock don't have to worry about being insolvent. So can you say rigging? Yeah, I think so. Story over an Investment Watch blog, whether the European Central Bank's mega bailout may have hit a wall. They can't produce any more money that's going to change the outcome. And we've been saying that all along. The ECB is a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. All these bailouts are just more loans. And the debt piles up faster than the available money supply. It is never any other way under this system, and that's why it's not working. Over at the Bank of England, one of their advisors, policymaker, Andy Haldane, he's a Bank of England director of financial stability, said they've wound up blowing the biggest conservative bond bubble in history. We're already seeing the effects of that in Japan. All these government bonds to try and float this little pyramid scheme along a little bit longer. They can't redeem them. They don't have enough taxpayers. They don't have enough actual wealth in the country. The same is true here in the United States. Now, we've been talking about all this rigging and corruption, this LIBOR, the gold prices. We were talking yesterday about the foreign exchange market is now scandalized for being rigged. And there's a new one showing up just today. We can't even keep track of all these signs of rigging and fraud by the financial sector. When we come back from these commercials, I'll give you the dirt on this. America, welcome back to the show. And we're talking about all this plethora of obvious frauds and crimes being committed blatantly with impunity by the financial centers, LIBOR, gold price rigging, interest rate rigging. We were talking about how the foreign exchange market is being played with yesterday, and now we have a new one involving the Consumer Confidence Index. This is one of these many indicators that Wall Street likes to bow and worship to, and it comes from the University of Michigan. It's supposed to be an analysis of overall trends in the population, how confident consumers feel. And under the deal signed between Thomson Reuters, which is the news agency and the data provider, and that University of Michigan, which creates the statistic. The deal is the data is made public at 10 a.m. on the day it is released. It's posted to a website. Everybody can go look at it. Now it's come out that Thomson Reuters, in exchange for a fee, is giving certain selected traders on Wall Street early advance notice. And the reason this is significant is that when this Consumer Confidence Index is made public, it can trigger major changes in the market. Confidence is up. Oh, they're going to start buying more stuff at the retail. We've got to get into retail stocks. And you'll see some major shifts in trading. And apparently the deal that Thomson Reuters has with these large investment houses with these direct data links, high-speed computer trading is, in exchange for this fee, they get this new index 5 minutes before it's made public. And with a computerized trading system, 5 minutes is all you need to start placing your buy and sell orders ahead of anybody else knowing what is going to happen when this number comes out. So it's another fraud. The system is rigged to give all the advantages and benefits to the 1% money junkies. And not you. You're not part of the club. You're not supposed to be allowed to get rich because you're politically unreliable. Another scandal coming out over Lululemon. Their chairman sold $50 million in stock 4 days before the stock plummeted. Little insider trading going over there. Now there's an interesting story. Do you remember a while back this horrible story about these two young children who were stabbed to death in their Upper West Side apartment? Supposedly the nanny did it, then tried to stab herself, but she lived. And we were all told that the nanny confessed to the crime. Well, now she's getting her day in court, and she's saying, no, I did not do it. Somebody else came in and stabbed the kids and tried to stab me. And the reason this is significant is because of the parents. The father of these two slain children is Kevin Krim. He was at that time the executive vice president of CNBC. He's the guy who allowed a report to be aired about a $43 trillion bankster money laundering and racketeering lawsuit that implicated not only Wall Street, but Washington, D.C. CNBC was the only place that carried it. Then his kids got killed, and the story was removed. But don't worry, the nannies confess. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. Phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. We're talking about the economy. We're talking about fraud. We're talking about criminality and the fact that everybody in Washington, D.C. seems to think it's okay. Now, over at moneynews.com, we have this gentleman, Byron Wine, who's vice chairman of the Blackstone Advisory Partners, saying the stock market will soon face a negative reality. which we all know is coming, and he's pointing out the fact that with all this buying of stocks, and we're seeing the American stock market being run up again, but investors, real investors, not the banks and financial institutions who are trapped into constantly buying more stocks to keep themselves solvent, but the ordinary, regular investors who are looking at returns and earnings are looking at the dwindling earnings for all these stocks. And they're still trying to say, well, the stocks themselves have value because they can be resold, and it's pure speculation, which is never what the stock market was supposed to be about. But they're saying that earnings are going to be disappointing in the second half of the year, and the investors on the market seem to be sensing that. And that's why a downturn is inevitable. Overall, if you're looking at the stock market, we're seeing, the numbers look really good for today, but if you skip back and look over the last week, major dip there, it's still struggling in that 15,000 area. But most investors are realizing it doesn't matter how they run up the price of the stocks. If the earnings aren't there, and you're not willing to play that giant open-air casino game of buying today and selling tomorrow, that now's the time to be getting out of the stock market and get into physical silver and gold. Republic Trading Group, Republic Trading Group, Republic Trading Group. Plug, 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 plug. Apparently, IBM is starting to lay off their workers in Westchester and Dutchess. This is reported over at lowhud.com. So their business is falling off here. A lot of people still very upset about the U.S. Farm Bill. This is actually being reported in the British press, and I know I heard a little bit about it yesterday. The new Farm Bill is going to cut 2 million Americans off of food stamps. At the same time they're openly advertising for the illegal aliens to come onto the program, law-abiding Americans who are dependent on this program are being cut off. And we see this here on Oahu. One of the two Feed the Hungry programs my wife and I are involved in involves this school that has their own food program for children of families on food stamps. Because at today's prices and with the cuts to food stamp money that we've already seen, the food stamp money gets you through little more than half the month. And the new Farm Bill is going to cut it back even more. But when it comes to the large agricultural corporations, it's just open season. The Monsanto Protection Act, all of this stuff about you don't need to know if there's GMO in your foods. It's a complete giveaway. Our government has even abandoned even the pretense of taking care of the people. Remember at the top of the show we were talking about this latest scandal involving the NSA spying. The NSA is taking information they find about you and sending it off to corporations who might be interested. Say something bad about your bank on Facebook, your bank's going to be told. Question the legitimacy of the F-22, which is still asphyxiating its pilots. By golly, that manufacturer is going to know about it. But when it comes to the people being warned about wrongdoing by the corporations, complete wall of stone. You are not allowed to know if these products are harmful. You don't need to know that stuff. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And apparently, Senator Rand Paul has now collected 250,000 signatures in support of a move to sue the government over the NSA spying on behalf of all the American people. I'll sign on to that one. They've been using my computer time and my computer memory and my internet connection for their use without just compensation, violation of the Fifth Amendment. We're going to go to the phones here. Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, what's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, how you doing there? My friend, how you been? Well, we've been down incognito again. Hey, Mike, that song that you played, boy, before you come on there, it just truly has hit the nail on the head, Michael, I listened to you in your economic report. I had a chance to sell my Jeep last week. It was a long journey of doing it, brother. And anyways, I went up probably about say an hour and a half way up north from me, and I went into this town called Portage.
Okay.
And I could not believe, Mike, house for sale, no house. House for sale, no house. House for sale, no house. Just right down the main block. So I get in with a guy that's going to purchase my Jeep, and I asked him a question. I said, Joe, I said, what's going on up here? It doesn't look very good. You know, when he come back at me, Mike, he didn't even say a word. And you know, you talk about that, I call it a new word for that, the fairy market. It's a hot air balloon market. And
yes,
when somebody takes that big needle and pops that hot air balloon, it's all coming down. Because it's all factitious. There's nothing there legit to back what the numbers are.
You're absolutely right here, and we know with the housing market, you know, they're deliberately holding foreclosed homes off the market. Remember, the bankers want those houses expensive, so you'll have to borrow more money from them and pay them more interest and more work product. They don't want you to have affordable housing. If you could pay off your home loan in 5 or 10 years like a car loan, after that, you're of no more use to the bankers, and you should not even be allowed to be alive if you're not going to be slave to the bankers. That's their attitude. They want that mortgage to last for your entire lifetime. That's what the word mortgage means, a pledge until death.
Yep. And, you know, Mike, and that's exactly right, because and another thing you're finding out, too, that I figured out, you know, they'll put these houses out for sale, and they'll run, and I've seen it here. Sometimes they'll put the for sale sign out, and then it's gone. But then again, you don't see nobody, nothing's happening there. And then the grass starts growing. Then you know that something's going on. That's the story in the summertime.
Yeah, it's being kept off the market. Or we know that a lot of these Wall Street firms who are getting all this instant cash from the Federal Reserve every month, $85 billion, and they transfer those failed mortgage bundles over to the American people, and they take all that cash for it. They're buying houses to keep them off the market, or to basically, you know, to try and privatize all of the public land and home ownership in this country. We're heading to a society, the money junkies want a society where they own absolutely everything, and you will spend your entire life from birth to death renting from them, their lordships. They're trying to go back to serfdom. And the model of serfdom was the land owned the people, as opposed to America where the people own the land.
That's exactly right, Mike. And I'll finish here. You know, it goes back to what you were saying, and I love you with your history of talking about some of our forefathers, you know. And way back then, it was like you mentioned that people, we the people, should run that toilet bowl out there in Washington, but it's the opposite now. The toilet bowl with the Fed and, like you said, these junkies, they're controlling we the people, and you got to wonder when that isn't going to lash out. So, Mike, thanks for taking my call, big guy, and I love you, and you be safe out there.
All right, thanks an awful lot. I will do my best. And you're absolutely right. Our civil servants have become our civil masters. And they don't think they have to follow the Constitution or any of that, and they are operating the country for their own personal gain and benefit, and that is fascism. When the government and the financial corporations are aligned, with not just financial corporations, pharmaceutical corporations, agricultural corporations, when corporations and the government are aligned together in a model of government called corporatism against the ordinary people, that is fascism. And they know they have pushed America to the edge of a revolution. That's why they're out there buying all the hollow point ammunition and training all their federal agents how to shoot Americans on sight. And it's not going to work. Do you really think some clerks over at the National Weather Service are going to risk their lives to man the barricades against an enraged American populace? Of course they aren't. We've seen how federal government workers are enthusiastic about the jobs they're supposed to be doing. They're going to run like heck, and then we'll gather up all those very expensive military-style weapons, and we'll sell them surplus after all of this is over. We'll sell them under the slogan, never fired, only dropped once. We're going to go back to the phones here. Mike in Kentucky. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
You said something about that they were using your bandwidth without your authorization, and boy, do I have a gripe about that. I can't get anybody to help me with it. I've contacted journalists from newspaper to print to television to radio. I don't know if you know who Bob Edwards is.
Oh,
but,
yeah, I know of him.
He after I finally explained the situation to him, he said, well, I just don't think the public will understand it, because I gave him a scoop 3 years ago on this stuff that the supposed whistleblower is talking about. And I called a news producer live while it was going on. We almost lost an advertiser because of it. Probably since at least 1997, we've been getting the audio of phones, not just cell phones, but even in one case that I'm 100% sure of, it was a cordless phone. Mm-hmm. While they're on the hook or on the charger or folded up in a woman's purse or on a man's belt pouch, the mm-hmm. audio from the microphones have been streaming out since at least the late 1990s. I had a technician that was involved in installing these things. You know, the Electronic Frontier lawsuit was over just this one secret splitter room in San Francisco. Well, I had a guy that gave me pictures that was a felony to possess these pictures for the stuff that he installed back in the late 90s.
Yeah.
From Chicago to California to North Carolina and Florida, he was involved in installing equipment. There's so much equipment in these facilities that they keep the air conditioning at 40 degrees because it generates so much heat. And
well, just think of all those global warming gases these facilities are creating out there.
They want us to use the compact fluorescent bulbs that's full of chemicals that emit emergency, dirty electricity and electromagnetic fields and crap. And then one facility in North Carolina, a friend of mine wrote me about in the newspaper, said it used the equivalent of 50,000 people's electricity of 50,000 people for one of these Google complexes. Well, these facilities that I have, and the guy, I had him, I thought was going to do a Man in the Shadows interview with me, and he backed out because he says his boss died in a violent car crash.
Well, there's a warning for you right there.
But anyway, for 15 years nearly, these phones were coming in and interrupting our fax line, on especially weekends and evenings, for hours on end. And it would when we would come back in after being gone from our office, it would just be locked up and it would say incoming call. And then I finally figured out I could dial *69 and figure out what the last number was. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when this audio was coming in, I figured out that I could get that *69 to work and then call them on the other line. And in some cases, when they wouldn't answer their phone, I fed them back the audio of their own phone mm-hmm. as a voicemail message.
Well, one thing you need to be aware of, and I'm going to have to cut you off here because we're coming up on a commercial break. There are occasions when people will put the wrong number into a fax machine and it'll keep redialing your number over and over again, and they're simply not paying attention. I remember, I'm old enough to remember the old-fashioned dial-type telephones, and because I was a kid and into electronics, I'd get these old phones and I'd take them apart to see what was in them. And when you put the phone on the hook, it did actually sever the connection to the microphone for the sake of privacy. But you're right, with cordless phones, with cell phones, with modern electronic handsets on landlines, the microphones can be remotely activated. It is intentional. All cell phones have that so-called speakerphone capability. Not that many people really use it. It is there to justify having a microphone on the cell phone that is able to listen to the entire room. That wonderful little smartphone on your hip, that's the government's portable snitch right there. And if you're doing something that you really want to keep private, you're going to have to leave that cell phone at home, or you're going to have to get one of these heavy cases, these radio-proof cases, where you will put your smartphone in there and it cuts it off from the cell towers and from the GPS. And it is, at this point, the revelation is you're being watched by the government all of your lives, using everything they can use to track you, your computers, your smartphone, your telephone, the Xbox. Huge fury over the fact that it's got a built-in microphone, and you've got to use it with this built-in TV camera, and it always has to be on the Internet in order to work. Microsoft's attitude is, well, if you don't want to put up with that, you can go back to the Xbox 360, and you'll be forever cut off from the future of computer gaming, which would not be a bad thing. Computer games, I think, well, I don't use them, except for flight simulators. Flight simulators are the only computer games I like to play with, and the rest of them, I don't really have time for that. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Mike, and we will be right back after these words. America, welcome back to the show. And speaking of video games, talk about propagandizing the young people. The latest version of the Rainbow Six video game franchise. It was based on Tom Clancy's novel about an elite anti-terror squad. Guess who the bad guys are in this new version of Rainbow Six that you're supposed to just shoot and kill and blow away with wild, reckless abandon? The Tea Party. Occupy. They're the terrorist threat. This video game is convincing young people they should shoot without hesitation. Those people who dare stand up and question the wisdom of the federal government, they're the villains. They're the bad guys. Shoot them. Shoot them. We're going to go back to the phones here. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? You know, talking about with the phones, how they probably can listen in even though you hang up the phones. If anybody's like tech savvy or anything, I would say come up with a ringer box switch where it goes between the wall in your phone, and it's with a caller ID with a ringer that you could just sort of like, when it rings, you just flip a switch and pick up the phone, and when you hang up, you just flip the switch and turn off the phone. This way they cannot tap in and listen in, even when you're hanging up with these cordless phones or whatever.
Well, what I do is I have a little table radio I tune to the local Christian station, and I just leave the phone on top of that all night.
Oh. Oh, that's...
Okay?
Yeah. I mean, but, something like that. Like, because, even like our computers having a net switch, even though you got DSL, they flip off the switch so they can't hack in your computer and see what's on your hard drive. Like
the cable modems from your cable TV company used to actually have a cutout button on the top. They don't have those anymore, but you can always unplug that wire if you're concerned about access to your computer. Of course, if your computer's off, I don't know how much they can do in there. Maybe more than we think. But, that's... Everybody's going to have to make their own choices. I mean, if I had anything private I didn't want the government to be knowing about, I'd put it on a separate computer with the Wi-Fi turned off and never plug it into the wall. Because that is your best security against the NSA, is not to have it connected. No Wi-Fi, no internet connection. If you need to move data back and forth, use a jump disk.
Well, you know what I found out, too? Speaking about spying, the sheriff's office back in Florida, where the attorneys and clients used to have their interviews, they found out there was a whole bunch of listening devices in there.
Yeah, I mean, we know there's microphones and stuff. It's everywhere. It's everywhere right now. And that's why people ought to be angry. I almost think if I had money, I would set up a new luxury vacation resort with no electronics, no electricity, just candles, lanterns, nicely cooked food and everything for people who just really wanted to get away from this stuff. No surveillance, no electronics at all. The whole resort is in a giant Faraday cage or Tempest vault, whatever you want to use for that. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who would just love to have a couple of weeks privacy with their significant other where they could absolutely be certain that nobody's looking over their shoulders. It almost seems to be a need for that right now. New business for the Hawaii tourism industry, I think.
The thing is, I always tell police officers, they go, well, if you're doing nothing wrong, you got nothing to hide. I said, this is what I have to hide. It's my personal dignity. It's my privacy. It's my life.
Mm-hmm.
I say, it's none of their business. And you have the cops sit there and go, we need to know what you're doing at all times. I'm like, no, you don't.
Yeah, I mean, anytime somebody says to me, if you're doing nothing wrong, you've got nothing to worry about, I point out that Apex scandal in Seattle, where U.S. intelligence agencies paid by U.S. tax dollars were stealing business secrets from law-abiding conference attendees to give to Bill Clinton's cronies. Yeah, we've got something to be afraid of. We got something to worry about.
Well, I just hope, that big NSA center they're supposed to be setting up in Utah, I hope it never comes online and that a drone accidentally fires a missile at it.
Well, it's a big place. One drone won't do much damage to it. I mean, apparently that building is 5 times the size of the U.S. Capitol building. And it's already online. It started operation last year. It's the one in Maryland that is just now being built up and is not due to come online yet. And we don't know what other facilities are out there. Probably they've got disks all over the place, and they just decided in Utah we got to get it under one roof, and they're just trying to consolidate it to simplify their data management issues, which have to be horrendous Anybody in IT has to understand that much data, they've got a major problem on how to actually get anything useful out of it. George, we're going to let you go and switch over to Matt in Texas. Aloha, Matt. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hey, you've been showing us here in the chat room that phone case that you have, and a bunch of us in the chat rooms have been wondering where you got it, what does it do, who makes it, where did you get it?
Okay, the website you go to, we're almost out of time here, is privacykase.com. And the people over there at Privacy Case were nice enough to just send me one as a gift. You can order them with corporate logos on them or simply have, blank the NSA or something like that on there. And over and above the privacy issues, it is a very sturdy case if you want to protect your smartphone from being dropped by those Butterfingers over at the TSA. We got to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we've been hearing from Wall Street and Washington, D.C. about the benefits of austerity. Austerity. You must all make do with less so we can have more. You must make do with less so we can have more. Blah, 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 blah. Now, we already know that austerity did not work to solve Europe's economic problems. Turned out this whole push for austerity was based on an Excel spreadsheet with an error in it that was not detected until after it had become the foundation of national fiscal policy for half the planet. And a little side note, when you yourself decide to reduce your standard of living, to have a simpler life, that's austerity. When the government comes in and makes you do it, that's dictatorship. And for all the talk about austerity that we are hearing, which is already leading to more rioting all over Europe here, the U.S. federal government in April went on a spending binge, the fourth largest spending month ever in the nation's history. What are they spending that money on? They're not spending it on our roads, our schools, our hospitals. They're not even going to be spending as much on food stamps. But boy, they are sure pouring billions and billions of dollars into keeping an eye on you. That data center in Utah is supposedly $2 billion. By the time they're finished with the one in Maryland, that'll be $2 billion. The Pentagon wants $23 billion for cyber security because they're that afraid of you. Remember the principle of odious debt. We know this system is getting ready to implode. We just sit and be patient. Do not carry out any acts of violence. Do not give the government any excuse to declare a national emergency and change the rules even more. It's all going to come apart. And after it's all over, we need to remember the principle of odious debt. We, the people of the United States of America, are liable for only those debts of the government incurred to take care of the American people, for roads, schools, hospitals, medical care. Under the internationally recognized principle of odious debt, we, the American people, are not responsible for debts incurred by the federal government, for war, for domestic spying and political repression, for handouts to foreign governments. And so our legal moral liability for the debts of the federal government is really just a tiny, tiny fraction of the debt they have run up for themselves. Major explosion and fire over in Louisiana at a chemical plant, 25 people injured. A reminder that our nation and its infrastructure are being allowed to decay. Another story about a major bridge being closed because it's on the verge of collapse. No replacement planned. Just going to have to drive upstream for 2 miles and cross on over there. We can't afford to build bridges here. We got to give more money to Israel. And if you refuse that, we'll say you're an evil person like Edward Snowden and Ron Paul. Something else they're spending all this money on, the Department of Homeland Security, is buying equipment for riot control situations. They're buying all this protective gear for their Federal Protective Service officers to prepare for riot control situations. The federal government has declared war on the people of the United States of America and all 50 states. They're getting ready to declare war on you. Interesting story about apparently IRS agents have been witnessed training with AR-15s, according to South Carolina Republican Jeff Duncan. And he says, we need to find out what's going on here. We know about all these IRS raids into medium and small businesses that are getting in the way of the large corporations, where they'll go in, shut it down, take all their computers and papers. Turns out nothing wrong was been done, but in the meantime, these businesses are driven out of business. Why? Because they were cutting into the profits of the giant corporations who are such wonderfully generous campaign donors. So we live here in a country where the government is absolutely adamant you may not have an AR-15, but their agents, oh yeah, they've got every need to have these guns to shoot the American people with. They know riots are coming. They're pushing us into those riots. It's a race between the collapse of the economy and the government ginning up some way to declare itself a dictatorship, which won't solve anything at all for the American people. It'll just allow the money junkies to stay in power and loot the nation a little bit longer here. Over in Turkey, dealing with their riots, which began over this little park that was going to be bulldozed for a building project by Erdogan's son-in-law, and it swept all across the nation over their austerity and their wealth inequality. And Erdogan is out there saying these protests will be over in 24 hours, and this time I really mean it. And he keeps saying it's all shut down, it's going to be dealt with, and it isn't. They went in and cleaned out that park, that square, and the next day the protesters were back. There's a showdown confrontation coming, and again, as I've said many, many times, the side that resorted to violence first is losing in the court of world opinion. We're seeing that in Turkey. Erdogan resorted to violence to try and quell this protest against his government and calls for his resignation, and world opinion has turned against him. And it's getting even worse over there. Erdogan is just furious at all this social media getting out pictures of the abuses. Remember the embarrassment we talked about earlier in the week where Erdogan was screaming how these protesters were throwing Molotov cocktails and destroying property, and somebody got a picture of them, and they were police officers. They'd put on, different jackets to look like ordinary people, but they hadn't even taken off their belts. And you could see the guns and police radios on full display, and Erdogan's upset about that. So apparently earlier today, the Turkish police shot down a video drone operated by one of the protesters that's taking videos of the size of the crowd and sending it out to the rest of the world, and they shot the drone down. So it's open season on the drones, people. When the government starts shooting your drones down, hey, return the favor. Now, down in Syria, things are not going well. The Syrian government forces are moving on the city of Aleppo, and it looks like this hired mercenary army, who are, after all, only there for the money, are running like heck. And we're seeing this story, even the Israeli media is out there saying, yeah, Assad is basically winning back control of Syria. The U.S. intelligence on Syria was totally wrong. It wasn't intelligence on Syria, it was propaganda and wishful thinking. Oh, we'll just start this little tiny revolution against Assad and the Syrian people will join in to topple the tyrant. It's the same mistake they made at the Bay of Pigs. When the U.S. had control over Cuba through Batista, who was bought and paid for, all the American corporations, United Fruit, PepsiCo, all of that stuff, and oppressed the Cuban people to the point where they basically kicked him out, brought Castro to power. And, of course, the U.S. said, that's a huge embarrassment. Our credibility depends on getting Castro out and putting Batista or somebody like him back in. And they sold Kennedy the invasion of the Bay of Pigs with the assurance that all they needed to do was land that Cuban brigade at the Bay of Pigs, and the Cuban people would just rush on down to the beach and join in and overthrow that evil Castro. And so Kennedy went along with it, landed the Cuban brigades at the Bay of Pigs, and the people of Cuba went down to that beach and stomped that brigade into the sand and sent a very clear message that they preferred Castro over anything the U.S. wanted to put in their place. And it looks like they've made the same mistake in Syria. They went in and said, we're going to have this little hired mercenary army. We'll train them and give them a bunch of guns. They'll start attacking Assad, and the Syrian people will join in and cry revolution and freedom, and they'll get a private central bank and a new U.S. puppet regime, and their oil will be for sale only for dollars, and all will be well. This is the biggest foreign policy Charlie Foxtrot since the Bay of Pigs. Israel is already indicating that as far as they're concerned, this thing is over already. The U.S. is still saying, what can we do to support the revolutionaries and, short of carpet bombing the Syrian capital from a B-2, there's not much they can do. This thing is pretty much over. And I think within the U.S. government they know it, because very clearly they're shifting from the idea of the Turkish-Syria border being the launch-off point. I'm sorry, that's related to the Turkish protests. But it's very obvious this thing in Syria didn't work out the way they wanted to. They're moving on Aleppo. Apparently they're moving on Homs. If they get those two cities back, this thing is over. This thing is over. And that's going to be a major, major check to this idea of going into Iran. When the problem is when you have unending war on the world to force them back to Bretton Woods, your first defeat is going to be your last one here. We're going to grab a phone call here. Bill in Idaho. Aloha, Bill. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks for everything you do, Mike. Excellent work. Just wanted to mention maybe you'd take a look at or pull CDApress.com above the fold today. Man dies in I-90 shooting. Number of different civic groups in the area, Second Amendment, etc., asked Mr. Wolfinger, Ben Wolfinger, if he was going to publicly announce his allegiance to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. Well, I think everybody got their answer from Mr. Ben Wolfinger this morning, because it took two of them, an ISP trooper as well as a Kootenai County sheriff's deputy, to shoot a 20-year-old on I-90. And it's quite extraordinary. I hope people are listening to you very closely, and they are supporting this broadcast. Make sure it stays on the air, because it's the only source. This never made it into any of the electronic media here in Spokane or anything. Shot this kid deader than a doornail. A welfare check. The same thing they called it when supposedly I wasn't eating my dinner at the right time and came to take me away. And the only person...
It's. I know about the abuses of the welfare check, and again, we have a police force that doesn't really want to deal with real criminals, so they come up with all this other stuff, traffic tickets, welfare check, where they can look busy and keep their salaries, but they're not going to risk themselves going out after the real criminals. I know there's been another multiple shooting in Missouri, and the gun grabbers are still out there. They're trying to figure how to revive this. Apparently the parents from Sandy Hook are getting a free trip up to Washington, D.C. yet again, saying, please take the guns away from the American people. Guns are bad in the hands of the American people. They're great in the hands of the government, but they're bad in the hands of the American people. The push is on. They're trying to figure out some way to take your guns away. They really, really are. Thanks a lot, Bill. We're going to let you go here. Up in New York, apparently they passed a new law trying to regulate the printing of these 3D plastic guns, and saying that only registered, licensed gunsmiths can print a plastic gun, and they have to register it with the government so the government knows where these are. And you keep asking, what part of shall not be infringed are you bozos not getting? Now, again, I view the plastic guns as symbolic. They are not practical weapons, at least at the current state of the art. They have a bad habit of blowing up when they are actually used to fire a round. And I'm sure from the government's point of view, they'd love the American people to be armed with guns that blow up in their own face when they pull the trigger. But there is a principle involved here. Personally, I'm of the view that a nice piece of oak or walnut and some iron and brass are going to get you something that is a little bit more reliable than those plastic guns here. All righty, let's see. U.S. debating options to help the Syrian rebels. Well, at this particular point, short of outright invasion and bombing of Syria's major cities with stealth bombers, there isn't much they can do. This does appear to be pretty much close to over. If Assad succeeds in taking Aleppo and or Homs, the world is going to say, yeah, this is over. This hired mercenary army fell flat on its face. Going to be the worst foreign policy disaster since the Bay of Pigs here. Meanwhile, we're getting this story over at thehill.com where Bill Clinton, who has just been named the Father of the Year, right, Danny, is out there saying that Obama risks looking like a total fool if he does not act on Syria right now. He's out there arm in hand with John McCain saying, we've got to do more forceful action in Syria, and you're going to look like a fool if you play it safe here. So, okay, Bill, you Father of the Year, you, if you really feel that way, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. We ran out of the desert camo, but here's a bright day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from Abu Ghraib. Watch your head climbing into that transport, and we'll call Assad and tell him you are on your way to Syria to kick his butt all by yourself. But after that whopper the United States government told us about Saddam's nuclear weapons, you will forgive we the people if we sit this next one out and keep our kids safe at home. Don't you just sort of miss the days of Alexander the Great and Napoleon where the people who wanted the war were out there in front leading their own troops instead of hiding back here in the United States of America and say, you, American, give us your children, we're going to throw them at the war. At least when leaders had to lead their own troops, they didn't start a war unless they really had a good reason to do it. When they're allowed to stay safe inside this country, protected behind their Lexan and Secret Service, they'll start a war anywhere. I'm bored today. What can I do? Let's invade Grenada. What the heck? It's not my kids, not my money. Netanyahu is out there trying to fan up war against Iran again, saying that Iran is planning a new Holocaust against all the world's Jewish people, and he's frothing at the mouth, and they're just screaming, you've got to get this thing going. They're planning all these evil things. Now remember, the last time Israel actually invaded a country in a war of aggression was over 200 years ago, which is a record neither the United States nor Israel can ever hope to match. They can't seem to go 6 months or a year without bombing somebody here. And again, there is zero evidence that Iran is developing nuclear weapons. None. Everything that's coming out is rumor and innuendo, and under Amano, the IAEA's whole presentation and spin is we can't find any proof of a nuclear weapons development program, but we're not convinced. Miss Cleo told us there's a bomb out there. We're looking in our crystal ball. The tea leaves and entrails are telling us that Iran has evil intent. So, Israel has just approved another 675 housing units for the West Bank. They're just rolling on into other people's country. The Israel Defense Deputy is saying under no circumstances will Israel ever allow a Palestinian state. And you realize that's the whole problem here? Israel demands a right to exist, but won't grant it to anybody else. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And my goodness, these 3 hours have just flown by today here. I have so much more I got to share with you, but of course we have tomorrow's show, and Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 to provide her perspective on the world here. Interesting little story, and this may be a very, very bad sign, but apparently the United States Supreme Court is now banning protests on their grounds. Now, they don't own that building. That building is the property of we the people. And under the First Amendment, we have a right to peacefully assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances. So for the Supreme Court to issue this ban tells us they too are ready to simply walk away from the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and that is a red warning alarm bell flashing at us. Another red warning alarm bell here is that apparently Cameron over there in Great Britain is out there referring to Vladimir Putin's government in Russia as a regime. We know what that means. When they start calling another country a regime, it means it's being targeted for replacement. There were some protests in the streets of Moscow just the other day. Looked all the world like one of these ginned up, phony marches to try and sell the world that the people of Russia are unhappy with Putin and we have to go in and liberate them. We've seen it before. We saw it in Iraq. We saw it in Afghanistan. Seeing it all over the place. This is why Putin is throwing out all these non-governmental organizations like USAID. because they're used to funnel money to these groups to try and cause trouble. And now Cameron's out there saying the Russian regime means you're on the list to be invaded there, boy. I'm not going to be able to do that one here. And remember back when Russia took control of their central bank? And I warned this would inevitably cause the U.S. to plan for war against Russia as part of the broader agenda to force the world back into Bretton Woods and back into private central banks. Gee, I hate being right all the time. Apparently issues are flaring up in Kashmir against India and Pakistan. Every time countries get into economic and social problems, the first thing their government thinks is, let's get a war going. War makes everybody forget about all that other stuff. We get a war going. They'll forget about the hardships. We'll blame it on the enemy, those gosh darn, whoever the designated enemy is. One good ruling out of the United States Supreme Court. Your DNA cannot be patented. Big pharmaceutical companies cannot extract your DNA, cut out a sequence, and say it's their patented property, it belongs to you. Patents can only apply to DNA created synthetically in the lab. So all of this reckless behavior where they were getting DNA from certain medical patients and saying, oh, it's our property now, we're going to make all this medication out of it, and you get nothing because we patented it, all of that is now gone. You own your DNA. All right, that's it for our show. We're going to head on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the afternoon. We'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. And again, every little bit of help you can send in to keep RBN on the air is needed and welcome, and we are so grateful for every little bit that comes on in. Go to republicbroadcasting.org, hit that donate button. We'll be back here tomorrow. Aloha, America.